Greetings, class. Welcome to Advocacy, Ethics, and Public Policy. I'm Tim Eccles. It was great to meet you when I was in St. Louis a few weeks ago. I look forward to working with you and getting to know all of you better as we go forward. Just a little bit about myself, a little more than what I explained before, so you sort of know where I'm coming from as we go through this course together. I had mentioned before that I started my career at the Lewin Group in Washington, D.C., a consulting firm. We worked on health policy issues for states and the federal government. I also worked for hospital associations, including the CHA, the Catholic Health Association, where I actually assisted them with healthcare reform during the Clinton debate, and also the development of what became the social accountability, or the community benefit guidebook. Back then we called it the social accountability budget. It was the original version of the community benefit structure. I moved from Lewin & Associates actually to the Catholic Health Association. I was there for 10 years. I worked both in the area of public policy, but also did strategic development for the association. And from there, I went to two healthcare systems. I was at Trinity Health, based in Novi, Michigan, for 6 years, Vice President for Public Policy and Advocacy, and then Hospital Sisters Health System, based in Springfield, Illinois, with a similar position, but I also was very involved with community benefit during that time there. And as I mentioned before, I am retired, semi-retired now, doing a lot of things that I described to you earlier, but one of which is teaching this course, which I very much enjoy. This will be the fourth time I've been teaching. So a little bit about what we're going to do in this overview of the course. We're going to start with the course outcomes, and talk about why advocacy is a core ministry imperative for our organizations. I'll then talk about the course framework and get more specific about the outline, the intensive, and the project we're going to work on together, and then just close with this week's questions for your discussion. The intent of this course is to enable you to be able to describe the main elements of American healthcare policy, and to explore some of the ethical challenges that are posed by those policies, both at the federal and state level, and be able to assess American health policy in light of Catholic social teaching. This is, of course, where the course will link back to what you've been doing in your previous courses so far in this program. And we're going to do that throughout these 8 weeks in such a way that hopefully you know at the end how to use mission and ministry values to help your Catholic organizations and the Catholic Health Ministry respond strategically to public policy, establish positions on policy, and then actually advocate for just public policies at both the federal and state level. This actually gets to the course framework, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a moment. Advocacy is a core ministry imperative. We are called in the healing ministry of Jesus to both serve and to transform. And to explain a little more about why it is that advocacy is so important and so core to what we do, I actually want to relate a story told to me by Sister Jean DeBlois, who was actually the founder of this program. And I want to say a word about Sister Jean because she actually helped me teach this course in previous years, and she's going to be a guest speaker during our intensive. Sister Jean DeBlois is Professor Emerita at Aquinas Institute. She actually founded this program, the Healthcare and Mission Program. She is one of the first people I met when I moved over to Catholic Health Association, and actually became a mentor to me, teaching me a lot about mission and ministry, and also why it is that we do advocacy in ministry as a reflection of how we are called to both serve and transform. And the way she described that to me was through the story of the leper in the New Testament. When Jesus touched the leper, he both healed the leper directly, actually serving the leper's needs directly. But he also, by touching the leper, challenged the social conventions of the day. As we know, the leper was considered to be an outcast, to be unclean. So when Jesus touched the leper, he was actually visibly rejecting the bigotry and the traditions of the day, and actually bringing the leper back into community and making him whole again. That was a transforming event for the day. And so when we talk about Catholic health ministry, we both serve patients directly and we work to transform those structures, systems, and policies that inhibit wellness and well-being. When it comes to advocacy, we're actually helping to support both of those callings in ministry. For example, around the area of serving patients, we need the capacity to be able to do that as healthcare ministries. And so there are some very practical and pragmatic policies that we work on to support our ability to serve patients directly. Implementation of the Affordable Care Act, fair financing, regulations, and conscience clause issues are examples. But a lot of our advocacy work is also aimed at the transformational element. Working on health reform, the uninsured and access, and then health system delivery reform, where there are many components in the Affordable Care Act and elsewhere designed to drive a better and more coordinated health system, how it is that we respond to that, how it is that we influence policy in order to make this healthcare system one that supports the needs of the vulnerable and the sick better. Maybe another way to say this is in your reading, actually. Sister Doris Gottmuller, one of your readings for this week, says it this way: the complexity of today's world require us to go beyond personal assistance to someone suffering from hunger or poor health. We need to address the systems and institutions that perpetuate these conditions or that impede the common good. There are other supporting documents around this concept of the core element of advocacy within the Catholic health ministry, including the ethical and religious directives. In accord with its mission, Catholic healthcare should distinguish itself by service and advocacy for those people whose social condition puts them at the margins of our society and makes them particularly vulnerable to discrimination. Another quote from Sister Doris from your article. And then this document on Catholic social teaching, that the teachings encourage participation in the political process of one's country as a means of achieving the common good. Now, in response to that, most healthcare systems actually make a direct reference to the advocacy process in their mission statements or in their strategic plan statements. And I'd encourage you to look for that in your own systems. This is an example from Hospital Sisters Health System where I worked. We had a strategic plan that had 4 pillars of activity. One of those pillars was Franciscan formation and mission integration. And we had this statement: continue to strengthen healthcare in our communities and influence public policy to support healthcare for all and the healing mission of the Catholic Church. We will be referencing during this course the CHA advocacy priorities. It's in your reading materials for this week. They're organized under these 5 concepts. I encourage you also, because we're going to be using it at the intensive, we're going to be going back to this during the intensive, but I'd also encourage you to find your own system advocacy agenda. Usually there'll usually be a statement of priorities or an agenda for advocacy. I'd like you to find that, read it side by side with the CHA document, and be ready for more discussion of that as we get to the intensive, but keep these things in mind as you do these readings in the coming weeks. We will always reference back as we go through these 8 weeks to this course framework. This is kind of the basic three-piece approach that we'll use to assess and learn from the various documents and our discussion. We want in this course to be good at knowing how mission guides how a Catholic organization will respond strategically to policy, establish positions on policy, and then influence legislative policy at both the federal and state levels. So when I say respond strategically to policy, what I mean is when there is something like the Affordable Care Act, which expands coverage for people, are we engaged in helping people get enrolled for insurance coverage? And if so, how are we doing that? When the Affordable Care Act calls for delivery system reforms through new payment structures that are designed to move us away from the fee-based approach to healthcare to a more coordinated and integrated approach to healthcare, how are we stepping up as organizations in order to do that well and respond to those policies that are out there? All of that becomes part of what we deal with in the advocacy world within our systems. How do we set priorities for what's most important in legislative advocacy? And then how do we actually go about doing that at the federal and state levels? So we're always going to talk about all three of these. When I had my position at the two systems, for example, I was spending a lot of my time helping system leaders interpret and respond to health policy as much as I was helping them promote change at the legislative level. All of this, of course, being informed by what we have talked about in this course, what you've talked about in this course throughout the previous weeks, the ethical foundation for Catholic healthcare, informing each of these three elements for the course. And that ethical lens, of course, will be key to the course as well. You will see in your readings a narrated PowerPoint by Sister Jean. She's actually going to go through these ethical commitments as they relate to advocacy and public policy. Just a little warning about that PowerPoint. It was done for one of the previous cohorts, so you'll notice that she describes the course as one that she and I are teaching together, and there's a few other elements that are a little dated, but the presentation really works well, and I wanted you to see that and know again that you'll be hearing from Sister Jean later as well. Human dignity, care for the poor and vulnerable, an emphasis on the common good, justice, and stewardship, informing our deliberations throughout the course. We'll begin our course after this week and the introductory material by moving into the U.S. healthcare system foundational concepts. In that week, I'll be doing a presentation as background on the Affordable Care Act. And I do ask for your forbearance in the sense that that presentation will be a little longer than the other ones will be. But it's important because a lot of what we're going to talk about gets affected by the Affordable Care Act, and a lot of what may happen going forward relates to the ACA. So it's an important presentation, and I ask you to be patient with its length. Then we'll move to the organization of healthcare and the role of insurance. From there, we'll spend some time on Medicare. On week 4, we'll go to the intensive where we do a deeper dive on healthcare reform and a series of other issues. Talk about that in a second. After the intensive, we'll talk about pharmaceutical policy, including some of the particular issues that affect Catholic healthcare around this, as well as some time on the opioid crisis, because I know it's very dominant for many of you in your organizations right now. Then we'll move to long-term care, end-of-life and palliative care, and wrap up the course with some discussion of health disparities. And of course, in the last week, we'll also revisit the course project to make sure you're ready for that. At the intensive, we'll actually begin with a discussion of the advocacy process and the tools we use to actually engage with lawmakers to try to influence change. And then we'll move to the topic of Medicaid, followed the next day by the uninsured and access to care. Then some discussion of the current costs in the healthcare system, why they're escalating, what the trends have been around that. Then to some of the policies and approaches that are designed to actually try to slow the growth in healthcare spending, as well as improve the delivery of care and enhance quality, often called delivery system reform and a movement toward population health, looking not just at the individual patient, but looking more at the broader factors that can influence health for the specific patients and that can make a difference in their well-being over time. And then a little time on the conscience issues and protecting life. And then on Wednesday, we're also going to have kind of a little exercise where, to get ourselves ready for the next day, on the issue of health reform again, we're going to actually do a little approach where you put together your own approach to Medicare for all, since that's really been big in discussions more recently in the policy circles. It's something we're going to spend a little time on, and this exercise, I think, will help you get ready for that, because we'll go into it more when we get to health reform again, but this session is also designed so that we can talk about where we are with the Affordable Care Act, the repeal and replace efforts, and then what the prospects are for the ACA going forward. Then we're going to have Sister Jean DuBois come and join us for a talk on dying well, ethical issues, and the role of advocacy. I'm hoping she can also spend a little more time with us on some of these other issues as well, because she knows them very well. Community benefit and its connection to advocacy, to be followed by an exercise we'll use where we're going to ask you to actually do a role play going in to talk to your senator or representative about proposed legislation around tax exemption, which is related to the community benefit issue. I'm hoping you'll enjoy that. It's kind of fun. As you know, our not-for-profit hospitals and systems are often challenged, whether they are doing enough charity care and community benefit to deserve their tax exemption. It seems like every time I start to teach this course again, Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa, who's the main proponent of this topic, brings it up again. And only a few weeks ago, he said he's going to have hearings. He's very concerned that hospitals aren't doing enough in that area, wants to have more accountability, just in time for us to have a discussion of it and to do some role play. So my thanks to Senator Grassley. And then we'll do a review of the project so that you're prepared for that. That project, you'll see in your syllabus, is designed in such a way that we want you to develop a detailed proposal to address a public policy advocacy issue of your choice. And in doing so, to cover these 4 elements. And we'd like you to do that in light of the Wilbur formation model that you've been using throughout the course. To think explicitly about how you develop this proposal, keeping in mind the 4 quadrants, the personal values and interior dispositions that influence individual actions and behaviors, and then the ministry culture and tradition that influence policies, process, and operations. We'll talk a lot more about this at the intensive, and also I will have specific grading criteria for you at the intensive. A little bit about your readings and your text. Please make sure you have the 4th edition of this book, Introduction to U.S. Health Policy by Donald Barr. It always becomes a little dated after he revises it. It was last done in 2016. So a lot of what I will do with my PowerPoints throughout the course is kind of bring us up to speed on what's happened since he wrote the book. But otherwise, I think you'll find it very helpful. He does a great job of describing and helping you understand the foundational concepts that led to where we are today with a lot of our policies. You'll see in your syllabus that I'd like you to sign up for a couple of emails that you'll get on a regular basis coming from the Kaiser Family Foundation that describe current events happening in healthcare policy. And a reason for that is I'd like you to include some of what you learned from those in your dialogues with each other during the week. So keep that in mind as you sign up for that. I mentioned earlier your system advocacy agenda, and then you'll see in the syllabus a number of PowerPoints and readings that will be supplied for you. So for this week, I know you already mentioned to me when I was in St. Louis, but if you could describe again, and maybe in just a little more detail, your background, and then the extent to which you've had any experience at all with public policy, advocacy, or community benefit. So again, to help me as I tailor what I'm doing throughout these 8 weeks. And then for your discussion, second thing, I'd like you to comment on by describing a professional or personal experience that reflects or illustrates the two contrasting statements that you'll read in the bar text. He says that when he teaches a course like this, he always puts these statements in front of the students and asks them to comment. I'd like you to actually comment by using some of your own experiences to contrast, number one, that the US has the best medical system in the world, and number two, that the US has one of the worst health systems in the world among developed countries. So we look forward to your discussion of those two issues, and I look forward to working with you in the coming weeks. Thanks very much.